Folks are super excited about tRPC, and it's easy to understand why. tRPC is the TypeScript remote procedure call data interchange format for client-server communications, and it's more strongly structured and typed than REST, but easier to use than GraphQL. So you can imagine why people are into it. And the easiest way to get into it is to try out Theo's T3 application starter kit, which includes Next.js, tRPC, Prisma, NextAuth, and Tailwind. So we're going to do just that. We are going to build out this note-taking application. It's pretty simple. It's going to connect to Supabase to store data, and it's going to use Github to do the authorization. I'm super excited, but before we get into it, we have a sponsor this week, and that's Scribe. More about them in just a bit. Let's get right into it. Okay, so here is our note-taking application. We have topics on the left-hand side. We've got an ability to add a new topic simply by just typing in a new topic, hitting enter, and that sets a new topic for us. We can change topics by just clicking on it, and we can add in a note by specifying a title, hello there. And this is all markdown. So I can say, starting off as a headline, I can put in triple backtick code sections. And then when I hit save, that is automatically added to my list of notes, and then I can delete a note. It's that easy. It's a really nice app that shows off essentially create, read, update, and delete, going all the way from the browser, all the way through tRPC, all the way to Prisma, and then into Supabase. Let's start building our app. I'm going to use pnpm create, and then I'm going to use the T3 app at the latest to create our note-taker application. Now we get to decide whether we're going to use TypeScript or JavaScript. I think the answer in this case is obvious. We're going to use TypeScript, and we get to choose between the different packages that we want to add on top, and we want all of them. We want NextAuth for authentication. We want Prisma to connect to our database. We want Tailwind to do our styling, and we want to use tRPC to do the interchange between the client and the server. Let's take a Git repo and do the pnpm install. If you're asking why I'm using pnpm and not yarn, I'm just kind of slowly migrating over to pnpm, but you can use npm or yarn or pnpm for this. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up in VS Code, and here we go. What we have is a standard out-of-the-box Next.js 13 application with some stuff layered on top of it automatically for us by that T3 app creator. If we go into our package.json, we can see in our dependencies that it's bringing in all this great stuff. It's bringing in Prisma. It's bringing in React Query from Tanstack. It's bringing in all of the tRPC stuff, as well as NextAuth, SuperJSON, Zod, a bunch of cool libraries. One thing you won't find in here is any kind of T3 library because there are no T3 libraries. T3 is just a starter kit. And like any starter kit, once you've used it, you're kind of stuck with what you got. So if T3 moves forward, your application isn't going to track with it unless you do those updates manually, but that's pretty much standard for all of these starter kits. Now I would fire it up and see what we have, but it depends on a database. So what I want to do first is create our Supabase database so that we can connect to it. Why am I going to use Supabase? Well, I want a database that I can connect to in development mode and in production mode. I want to connect to the same database just to make it easy for this video. In reality, you want to have one database for developers, usually individually, and then you want to have a database for probably staging and test and production. So you're going to have a bunch more databases. We're just going to use one to make it super easy on ourselves. So I'm going to go over to Supabase. Here's my Supabase setup. I'm going to do new project. I'm going to call this Notetaker. And then I'm going to let it create a password for us. And I'm going to copy out that password and paste it off somewhere you can't see, but you'll see it later. We'll create that project. Now this will take a while to get set up. I'm just going to clip that out though. All right, once you see these usage statistics up here, that means you're ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the project settings and then look under database. Yep, that's the one. And then go into URI. And that's going to give us a URI that we can then use as our database URL. So I'm going to copy that. And now I'm going to go over to our application and get it all configured. Okay, so the first place we're going to take a look is we're going to take a look at Prisma. And we're going to change out this SQLite, which is a file-oriented database. And we're going to change that out for Postgres because we want to have our database in the cloud. So bring in Postgres SQL there. Awesome. And we'll also follow the documentation here about DB text. There's a few fields that have strings where those strings could get potentially large. So we want to specify that those are DB text. Fair enough. So actually, let's take a look at the schema while we're here. There is the example table here. That's just a placeholder that is an example to show you how to connect to the database using tRPC. We're just going to essentially avoid that. The thing that you need, and it's necessary for NextAuth, as commented here, is the account, the session table, the user table, and the verification token table. I wouldn't mess with any of these except for user, where we're going to add on the stuff that we have for our topics and notes. Okay, so we've got our Postgres SQL set up there. Now we need to go over into our .env file and change out our database URL for the one that I got from Supabase. And that includes the password that was replaced. So there we go. By the time you see this, this database won't exist. So even if you see this password, it's not a problem. Okay, I actually think we are good to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up our console, and then we're going to use pnpm Prisma to do a database push to push the schema to production. Okay, it says it's working. Let's go over to our Prisma and actually see. So let's go over to our table editor, and we can see, aha, we got some tables. We've got account, we've got example, we've got session, user, and verification token. Awesome. You can add seed values if you want. I don't think any of this is seeded. Not a problem because we're going to seed them once we log in. So the next thing to do is to figure out how to log in. So now by default, T3 is set up to connect to Discord. Now, I don't think we all have Discord accounts. Maybe we do, but I do think we all have GitHub accounts. So instead of using Discord, I'm going to use GitHub as our NextAuth authorization provider. Now, NextAuth has a ton of authorization providers that you can use. You get to pick which one works for your project. So how do we get that going? Well, we need to go over to GitHub. And once we're at GitHub, we're going to select settings and then scroll down here to developer settings and then look at OAuth apps. Now, there's a trick when it comes to GitHub, which is unlike other authorization providers. When you do an OAuth authorization flow, your application needs to get called back on a specific URL. And GitHub only allows a single URL for a given OAuth app. That means that we have to have one for our development application, which is going to redirect back to localhost. And then we're going to have another for our deployed application, which would be on Vercel. So let's create the developer one first. And then we give it the homepage URL, which in this case is going to be localhost 3000, which is where the application boots. Application description is optional. And then we're going to give it a callback. So the callback is going to be that localhost 3000 and then API, auth, and then callback, and then the type of provider. So in this case, it's going to be GitHub. In the case of the original Discord, it was Discord. Whichever provider you have, that would go there. So let's register that application. Awesome. And now we get a client ID, which I will save off. And what you do next is click on generate a new client secret to generate a new client secret. Then I'll copy that and I'll refresh this page. And now you can see that you can no longer see that secret. You can only get it the once. But I've got it stored away, no big deal. Now we need to go create a second one. But if I were on a team and I was working with other developers, I would want a way to show them how to navigate through all of these clicks. And normally I would do that using a bunch of screenshots, which is kind of a pain in the butt, honestly. So what I'm going to do is instead of doing all that work myself, I'm going to use Scribe. This is awesome. Check this out. So this is the Scribe homepage. And what Scribe does is it installs a browser extension that will track all of your clicks, and then it will build a step-by-step workflow that you can then publish to a URL or send an email or PDF. It's awesome. So let's log in using sign in. Now I'm in using my Google account, and I need to install that Chrome extension. So I'm going to go over here to the Chrome Web Store and add to Chrome. And now I'm going to walk through that GitHub flow again, but with the recorder on. So let's do this new record a scribe, do a new tab, and then I'm going to go to the GitHub starting point. And I'm going to do settings. And you can see it recording down here. Really cool. Developer settings, OAuth apps. And now we have our Notetaker dev. I'm going to go and add a new one. Notetaker prod. I'm going to use Notetaker Vercel app because that's where it's going to be when it's there. And then I'm going to give it its callback URL and I'll register the application. Now we are done. Let's click on our recorder, complete recording. And now we have, check it out, a GitHub workflow to create OAuth. And look how easy this is. Automatically, it's created the first step. Click on this, go to GitHub. Look at how good these screenshots are. And I can even go in and edit them if I want to add some stuff on them. And step by step, it shows you how to go through each step of the OAuth flow. You can even say, type the name of your application here. You can add new steps of different types. You can add another recording. You can add an alert or a tip or a GIF. It's great. So let's say that we're done editing this. And now we want to put it somewhere. We want to add it to our README because this is going to be the instructions that we're going to give to our developers. So I'm going to hit share and look at all these options that I get. I can email it to somebody. I can embed it as an iframe. That is great. I can do an export to get it out to PDF or HTML or Markdown. And I can copy it as a link. And I'm going to copy it as a link because I want it to be a live connection between the project documentation and my Scribe. So that later on, if I want to update that Scribe because the workflow has changed, I can do that. Now I'll take it over to our README. I'll add a topic. I'll put brackets around that, put in my URL for my Scribe. Now in VS Code, I'll do a preview and I can click on that. And there it is. All of the documentation for how to get an OAuth token. 13 steps recorded by me, 35 seconds. So easy. I'm loving on Scribe. It's great stuff. Make sure to try Scribe out for free by clicking on my personalized link in the description down below. All right, so back in GitHub, I've got my client ID. I do need to generate another client secret. Okay, now I got my prod and development set of client ID and client secrets for our OAuth authentication. Let's go back into our application and get this all set up. Okay, if I look at my .env file, we have Discord client ID and Discord client secret. That's because it's set up for Discord. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab the client ID here and see where that's actually used. So go over here to Discord client ID and search. There, it's there in the example. We can get rid of that. It's in the MJS. So this is interesting. Okay, so what Theo has done is he has used Zod, which is a library that allows you to verify the structure of objects and arrays, but also outputs TypeScript types to create a set of types for the environment variables, which is, I've never seen this done before, but I love this. This is great. This actually helps you on application startup, make sure that everything that you need in the environment is ready to go. Of course, we don't need a Discord client ID in this case, we need a GitHub client ID. So let's go and change that out to GitHub. And then finally, over in auth.ts, which is also in the search results, we have our Discord provider, which we're going to change to GitHub. And we'll change Discord provider to GitHub provider. And then we'll change our environment variables from Discord to GitHub. How cool is that? And you see the red squiggly went away because after I changed the types, the Discord ones were no longer valid, but the GitHub ones were, and now we are green. Ha! Awesome. Okay, so next thing we need to do is try this out. To make it easy on myself, I'm just going to use export and then set the environment variables right in my terminal. And I'm going to do the same thing for the secret. And one more thing, I'm going to go over to our environment and I'm going to set this NextAuth secret. Now Theo's got a nice little thing in here. We're going to use an OpenSSL random number generator. So that will create a nice random string for us. We can then just copy and paste into the NextAuth secret like so. And that's not really a secret. It just needs to be some sort of random string. And let's try it out. Okay, looks like it's working. Let's try and sign in. This is a good start. And it looks like we're good. Let's authorize myself. Now I'm being redirected back to my application using that redirect URL that we specified back to localhost. And it's telling us that I'm logged in as Jack Herrington. Awesome. So we'll get into why we can now see the secret message in a bit. It's about protected routes versus unprotected routes and public routes. It's cool stuff, but we'll get there in a second. So the last thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we can go end to end with this. I want to show you how to deploy it because I think that's really important. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to Vercel and get this set up for deployment. But Vercel is going to want me to have this in a GitHub repository. So the first thing I need to do really is go over to GitHub and create a new repository for Notetaker. So create a new repository, call it Notetaker. We'll create an empty repo. And the only real thing I need is this remote add origin. I always just kind of copy that, leave the rest. And I go back over here to Visual Studio Code. I stop it. I'm going to go and add all the existing files. I'm going to commit that. And then I'm going to go and set that remote. And now we're connected to GitHub. So now I'm going to push to GitHub. I'm going to use the GGP alias, which is going to push to main. That's an oh-my-posh alias. They've got a bunch of really good ones for Git. All right, let's go see if we've added the code to our GitHub. And we have. Okay, let's go over to our Vercel dashboard. I've logged in using my GitHub credentials. And now I'm going to add a new project. I'm going to import Notetaker. It's already predefined for Next.js. It's looked at our repo and said it's an Next.js application. The only thing we need to do is set all these environment variables to what we have in that .env file or any other environment variables that we need. So I'm going to do that. I'll set that database URL, and then I'll set a few more. And I'll just zip through that. All right, those are all set up. It is time to deploy. I'm going to hit that deploy button. All right, congratulations. Let's click on it and see if it worked. All right, good. Notetaker Vercel app, good enough. Let's hit sign in and sign in with GitHub. And it worked. How cool is that? Wow, we are end-to-end deployed. So now we can actually start building out our Notetaker app. Let's go over to our Visual Studio Code. The first thing I'm going to do is bring in DaisyUI, as well as Tailwind typography. So what is DaisyUI? Well, DaisyUI is a toolkit that sits on top of Tailwind. It is a set of really nice components. So take, for example, button right here. All you need to do with Daisy is give it the class name of BTN for button, and then you can give it a bunch of extra ones like button primary or button secondary, and it changes the look of the button. And there are all manner of components, cards and collapsibles and all that. If I did that over in Tailwind, a button would look like this, inline flex, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to deal with all that. I want to use button. So that's why I'm over on DaisyUI. What I'm doing is I'm using DaisyUI for the components, and then I'm using all the layout stuff with Tailwind, all the padding and the margins and the flex box and all of that. I do all that with Tailwind. Everything else I do with Daisy. Okay, so let's go back into our code. Now the other thing I brought in was Tailwind CSS typography. And what that does is, since we're going to be working with Markdown, it goes and has a bunch of classes that map to the Markdown CSS classes, so that when I use the Markdown component to format our Markdown for our notes, it automatically gets the right classes because that Tailwind CSS typography is. Now, in order to use those, I need to go and update our Tailwind configuration. So go down here to Tailwind configuration and bring in some plugins. So pop that in there for the plugins. We'll bring in typography and DaisyUI. And what it's telling us is that DaisyUI doesn't have any type information on it. What I have noticed with T3, and it's not surprising because Theo is a huge TypeScript fan like I am, is that the TypeScript configuration is set really tight for T3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little bit hacky, and I'm just going to have it ignore that file. So I'm just going to exclude that from the list of files that we're going to type. And there we go. That is our additional UI. Okay, so now we've got our typography and our DaisyUI set up. Now it's time to go back a little bit and start looking at the database. So let's go take a look over in our schema. And we need to add some stuff to our schema. We got that example that we don't really use. We're going to go and add some additional tables that we will use. We're going to add a topic table. And a topic is going to have a title as well as a user. Every user is going to have their own list of topics. And within topics, there's going to be notes. So we need a note. Now a note is going to have a title as well as some content. That content's going to be marked down. And it's going to relate back to its original topic. So it's going to do that using a topic ID. So the really important fields here when we go and add a note are the title, the content, and that topic ID. And then when we add a topic, it would just be the title as well as the user ID because it needs to connect to a user. And then finally, this is complaining that the user table does not have a relation to topics. So let's go and add that. There we go. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Next thing we need to do is just deploy this. So let's go back over to our terminal, do pm, then do Prisma again, and push that DB. All right, let's go over to our Supabase and see if that was deployed. We'll hit refresh on the list of tables. And there we go. Now we have topic and we have note, both of which are completely empty. It's worth noting that the application that's currently deployed will not be affected by this because these are just new tables that it is completely unaware of. So let's go back into our app and see how we are connecting with that example table, because we're going to want to connect to our new tables kind of the same way. So if we go over into API and then into tRPC, we can see that this is the generic endpoint, pages API tRPC, and then tRPC is going to take over and manage all of the requests here. So we get this create next handler from tRPC, and then we get a bunch of routes, and those routes are defined over in the server API route. So we have the server directory. Under there, we have APIs, routers, and we have the root route. And that root route brings in a route for example from router's example, and then it connects it to example. And what does example do? Well, example has 3 different procedures on it. It's got this hello procedure, which is a public procedure, which means that you can call it without being authorized. And it will return, given a text as input, a greeting, hello, with that text. This is pretty standard RPC stuff. Whenever you see a basic RPC, you see this kind of thing. And then we have a procedure that connects to Prisma, which is very handy. So that shows us an example of how we're going to connect to Prisma. In this case, we are going to do a find many on example. And then finally, we can get a secret message. So this is a protected procedure. That means you have to be authorized to call this. So in our case, we're only going to have protected procedures because it's all specific to a particular user. All your topics and notes are specific to you. You don't want anybody else seeing them, and you want to manage your own. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build our topics router. And I'll just paste in that. We're going to get rid of public procedure. We're only going to have protected procedures, and we'll change this to topic. And then I'm going to use this get all as a starting point. Paste that in there. And instead of a public procedure, this is going to be a protected procedure. It's going to be a query because we want to query data. We don't want to mutate anything. And instead of example, we're going to use topic. But we're going to pare it down. So we're going to say where our topic ID is some input topic ID. So where do we get that input? Well, let's go back over to our example. And here we go. We can just copy and paste this example. Pop that in there right before the query. And we'll call that topic ID. It just happens to be a string. And all we need to do is connect that to our input. Oh, you know what? I was wrong. Notes have topic ID. It's user ID for a topic. But if we were to take that as input, that wouldn't be so good. What we need to do instead is get that from our context and get it from the session and the user and then their ID. So we don't need the input. Okay, I think that's going to work. But I also want to add a create. So let's go and add a create now. And we'll take as input a title. And we'll make a mutation instead. It's going to take a context and input. Now that input has that title. And then we're going to create a topic with the title and the user ID. Pretty cool. So now we just need to connect it to our routes by just importing it and then adding it to our routes. So now we can start building out our page because we have a connection to our data through tRPC. And you're going to love this. It's super strongly typed. It's great. Okay, so back over in our pages index. So before I start paring this down, I do want to show a few things off. So right here at the top of the home page, we call the hello route on example by using api.example.hello.useQuery. And then we give it any parameters we want, like so. And this is React query on top of tRPC. Now here's where the fun really begins. If I go and look for hinting, I get text because tRPC has done all of the hard work of marshalling the types from the API definition that we did in the pages directory into the client side of the house. And you can actually do this across projects within a monorepo. It's really, really nice. So same sort of thing applies down here with the get secret message. So that is the protected one. And we only call it, we only enable it. And this is a React query thing, this enabled when we have a user. So really clean, really nice way to make API calls. Okay, but I don't need any of this stuff. So I'm going to get rid of all of it. And we'll call this Notetaker. Looks like a good starting point. So first thing we want to do is put a header at the top of the page. So I'm going to create a new directory called components. And within that, header. Now into that header, I'm going to bring in sign in and sign out and use session from NextAuth. And then let's start returning a JSX template. So we're going to create a DaisyUI navbar. We're going to give it some color with primary, and then we're going to use a flexbox to lay out the username and then a little avatar on the side. So let's just start off with this and see if that works. And drop it into a main. And I think we actually need to launch the app, right? Okay, there it is. It already knows who I am because I logged in previously. So now let's go and put our avatar on the other side of the header. So if we have a user, then we are going to put a label on there with a avatar. And I think I just need to make sure that we have strings there. Otherwise we won't build properly because of TypeScript. And if we don't have a user, then we got a sign in button. Let's hit save and see what we got. And there we go. Smiley face over there. Hello. So now we're going to build the topics on the side, but I'm not super happy with this whole dark mode layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to our pages and create a new document. And I'm going to paste in a simple document for us. And that's going to give us a data theme of winter. That's a DaisyUI thing. There's a bunch of different themes that you can choose from. I chose winter, and that gives it a nice light look. I like it. So we got our header done. Now we're going to start on our topics. So down here, I'm going to make myself a content component. And by the way, don't worry, all of this code is available to you on GitHub for free and a link in the description down below. You don't have to try and follow along with me. I get that I'm going through this really quickly. So we've got our content component down here. We're going to get the session off of that. So that's going to tell us who we are. And I'll reference it up here. Okay, cool. All right, so this isn't happy because we don't have use session currently. So let's bring that in from our NextAuth React. It's currently unhappy because we haven't actually output anything. But we'll get there, right? What we really want to do is we want to go get the topics. So let's go and get the topics using API, but we don't have API yet. So let's bring that in. Pop that up here. And yeah, it looks like we're good. So let's just return that out as a JSON stringify just to make sure we got the data. We can see a little set of brackets over here, and that basically tells us we got an empty array. Woo! Awesome. So what we really want to do is we want to go and add a topic at this point. So we need to go and get a mutator for create so that we can add a input that allows us to then call that create to create a topic. So first we bring in our use mutation for create topic. And then we're going to start actually laying this thing out. So let's start out with our layout. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, we got a little bit of padding to bring it in. We got a little bit of padding on the top with the MT5. We've got a grid. So we're now laying this out in basically 2 big columns. Actually, it's a 4-column layout, but this first column is going to be 1/4 of that. And then the second column is going to be 3/4 of that. So that first column is going to have the topics. The 3/4 column is going to have the notes for that topic. Okay, so now into our first column, we want to bring an input field. And that input field is going to have the usual DaisyUI stuff on it, much, much nicer than Tailwind. And when we hit enter on that field, we are going to call the mutate method on that create topic that we just got over here. And we're going to add a new topic. Okay, let's try it out. Okay, we got a new topic over here. Topic numero uno. Hit return. And did it work? Who can say? So what we need to do now is actually show the list of topics. So to do that, I'm going to bring in a UL up here where we have LIs for each one of the topics. And let's hit save. And there we go. We have topic numero uno. But what we really want to do is we want to refetch whenever we create a new one, right? So first thing we need to do is we need to say, well, when we do our create topic, if we are successful, then we refetch topics. But the TypeScript definition is, again, really tight. And it says that refetch topic returns a promise and you aren't awaiting that. So to avoid that, we can just do void. And that basically says, we're cool, just ignore the return type. So now we're refetching topics whenever we add a new one. Cool. But what we really want to do is we want to be able to have multiple topics and be able to select between them. So we have to have the notion of a selected topic. So to do that, we need some use state. Good old use state. And then we'll use it down here to say that we have a selected topic. So it's going to start off as null. And then on success, we're going to say that we want to set that selected topic to either the currently selected topic or the first item in the data or nothing. But one thing we don't have is topic. How do we get the type of topic? So what is topic? Well, topic is coming out of our router. So what we can do is we can get the type of the output from the routers. It's called router outputs. And then we can create a type. And from that, we can say that we want the topic router. We want the get all, because that's what's going to return us the topics. And that comes in as an array. If I do Command K, Command I, we see that we have an array of topics. So I'm just going to grab the 0th item off that. Even if there isn't a 0th item, it's fine. It's just a type. And do Command K, Command I, and now we have a topic type. How cool is that? And it's dynamic. So if I ever change topic, it works. No problem. Let's see. Is there anywhere else I need to do set selected topic? Probably down here when I click on it. Cool. And I think we are good. Let's try and add one and see if it works. Topic numero dos. Hey, cool. All right. Now we can click between those two. Awesome. Okay, so now we have our topics. Now we need our notes. And we already have the schema for that, but we don't have a router to get that data to the client. So let's go back over here and we want to create a new router for note. So again, we're going to bring in Z for Zod to define our input types. All of these are going to be protected procedures. We'll create a get all just like we had with note, but this time we'll use topic ID, or we did before, but we got it wrong. That looks good. Now we need to have some way to create a note. So let's bring in that. So this is going to have an object input, which has a title, a content, and a topic ID to connect it to. And then we will create our note. And then the last thing we need to do is create a delete function. So this is going to delete an item from our list of notes, and we just give it an ID, and that's it. So there we go. Now we just need to connect it to our root route. And there we go. Now we have the API side of our work done. So we got our Prisma, we got our API on top of that. Now we just need to build the UI on top of that. The trick with this one is we want to have a way to edit Markdown, which is really nice. And a really nice code editor is CodeMirror. So we're going to bring in CodeMirror as well as the React Markdown library to display the Markdown once we have it. So let's go and add in all of that stuff. So I'm going to bring in the React component for CodeMirror, then React Markdown, which is a way to show Markdown, then additional CodeMirror libraries to support Markdown syntax. And there we go. Okay, let's run again. And now we want to create a way to edit a note. So let's go and create a note editor component. And let's start off with our note editor. What we're going to do is we're going to bring in useState because we're going to use that to track the code as well as the title. We are going to have an onSave callback so that when you hit the save button at the bottom, it's going to call onSave. And then we're going to go and bring in our CodeMirror stuff. That's just going to support the CodeMirror component. And then we're going to build a DaisyUI card. Here it is. It's a card. There's a title section at the top, and that's going to have our input with our current name or title. Let's go and just bring that in now and see how it looks. And I'll pop this down in the second column. And let's take a look. Okay, looks good. It's giving us a little bit of guff because we don't have an onSave. And we'll get there. Let's add the Markdown editor just below the title. And this is just as easy as using an input. You give it a value, you give it an on change, and it works. And then you give it some extensions to tell it, hey, what is the language type? And you give it some sizing and some classes. It's beautiful. Okay, so let's go take a look, and wow, hot diggity. So now we can type in Markdown in here, and look at that. It's all colorized, gorgeous. Last thing we need is a save button, which we're going to put down here. Again, we're going to use that BTN primary that we get from DaisyUI. We're only going to enable that button if we have a title and some code. And then when you get clicked, we're going to call onSave with our title and our content. Okay. So now we need to give it an onSave. So to do that, we kind of have to have a list of all the notes. So we're going to call note.getAll, and we'll map that data output to notes, and then we'll have a refetch notes, and then we'll connect topic ID to the selected topic ID, and we'll do our enabled thing so that only if we have a user and we have a selected topic are we going to run our getAll. Pretty easy. And then once we have that, we can create note, which is our mutation that calls create. And when it's successful, it calls refetch notes, just like create topic called refetch topic. Now we have create note. We can go all the way down to our note editor and add our onSave. It's going to call create note, mutate, and give it a title and a content and a topic. And let's try this out. So first note, and I'll hit save. And now that's zeroed out, so that's a good sign, but we don't actually have a list of notes. So let's go and build that by creating a note card component, which will then iterate over so that it displays these notes. Okay, so here's the beginning of our note card. We have our React Markdown component that we're bringing in. We're bringing in router outputs because we want to get the type of note because we're going to pass it a note and we want that to be strongly typed. So again, we are going to get the note getAll and get the zeroth off of that to get the note type. Command K, Command I, and that gives us our note. Again, that tracks so that when we change the Prisma schema, it automatically goes through all of it. I love it. Okay, now note card is going to be an expando contracto collapsible item. So we're going to track that using a useState. And now let's add in some JSX. Okay, so this is just going to have the note title in it currently, as well as the collapso expando type thing here. So if you click on the title, then it expands or collapses. So let's go and bring that into our index. And then right down above our editor, we are going to add in our list of all of our notes. Now, we don't have that delete note mutation yet, so let's just add that. It's as easy as just changing out this for delete. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go to down here, see if it looks good. Yeah, it looks good. Let's go back over here, and we have our first note. Awesome. And the only thing we have left to do is add the markdown section and the delete button. Okay, so to get the markdown, we're just going to put that below the collapse title. And here's the little trick. So we have our collapse content. That's just for the DaisyUI collapser and expander. But within that, we're going to use this prose. And it's prose that brings in that typography from Tailwind CSS. Without that, we don't get the really nice look of all the markdown. And then within that, we bring in the markdown component. All right. Hey, wow, look at that. How awesome is that? Okay, looking good. The last thing we need to do is bring in our delete button. Okay, we're just going to call on delete. We're going to give it a warning style and make it a small button. And let's take a look. There we go. Got delete over here. And let's delete it. And there we go. It's gone. All right, one last thing to do before we package it up is to redeploy it. The way that we do that is we send it off to GitHub. Let's add all the files, create a commit. And then we push it. And that will automatically start a redeploy. Go over and take a look at Vercel. And we can go into the deployment section, and we can see that we're automatically building and have been for 9 seconds. Awesome. It's really easy when you create that nice CI/CD flow. And we're redeployed. Let's go check it out. And there it is, completely deployed. How easy is that? All right, well, I hope you enjoyed learning all about Theo's T3 scaffolding for tRPC applications that use Tailwind, Prisma, NextAuth, and of course, tRPC. And that you're excited about how easy tRPC is to use and how the types just absolutely seamlessly flow from one end to the other. Now, I have gotten asked in the past whether tRPC is compatible with other things. Can a Go application call tRPC? Can a iOS application or an Android application call tRPC? Absolutely they can. All tRPC is just an extra layer on top of a JSON protocol. So when you see it go across the wire, it looks exactly like essentially a REST RPC type request. It's only when you bring TypeScript into the mix that you get the extra added value of having all of that type information. Well, I'm sure you have questions. Be sure to put those in the comment section right down below. And if you like the video, please hit that like button. If you really like the video, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and click on that bell and you'll be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.